Alright, so today we're building something that not a lot of people would need, but for me it's very key, and it all has to do with my charging situation for the e-boards. It's nice to have a dedicated spot for these, so I can be ready to go whenever I feel like going for a ride and not be bogged down by having to find a remote or a charger. Now, I've seen a lot of wall-mounted solutions for these e-boards, but I really like my stuff on wheels, as I've experienced moving homes twice this year, and it's simply the most awful time waste having to remodel everything every time. So ideally, I'd like everything I ever own to be non-integrated, and that way when I move to a different apartment I can just roll it out of this one and roll it into a new one, not have to deal with like the mess that is left behind because you have to drill holes and that, it takes a while to get around to. It's made with one sheet of plywood that is 60 by 120 centimeters, one of these 3 meter 50 by 50 millimeter beams that you see me cut the size right now, and with this we'll create a very simple box. I like these projects to be quite simple, fast and easy, as I've said many times, no fancy joints here, just building it as if I'm a child with no construction skills whatsoever, and somehow that's worked out for me over the years. For this build we didn't really have a complete plan ready before I started building, but sometimes seeing it in person will help you put the final touches on a project, so therefore it's not always necessary to plan out every detail, as you'll most likely run into a better solution along the way. This time I'm not so sure if that was such a great success though, as in the end I do feel there were certain things that could have been a little bit better, but you'll see that later on. If you'd like to do this project yourself, it's sometimes also nice to sand down all the parts on every side. In this case I'm just doing the corners so we can do the glue up, but this does mean that the inside is far less clean and might result in some splinters. I've never really had an issue with it, but I did do this on my desk setup and then painted it white, so it'd be far easier to see all the cables, and it's something worth considering. Now, here in the Netherlands we always receive a shocking amount of junk mail if we don't have a special sticker on our postbox. Personally, I quite enjoy it as I often use it for glue up jobs like this or the occasional paint job. You can definitely manage with a few glue clamps in this project, but for some reason I always feel like I'm lacking in the glue clamp department, so I guess this is a case of the more you have, the more you use. I've recently also heard a lot of creators saying that pouring salt on one of these glue ups will prevent the piece from slipping about, which might be something to try out sometime. Perhaps its slippery nature is also because of the excessive amount that I'm pouring on here. I actually did this specifically so that after the sanding process it's all nice and uniform, no visible gaps, and overall it just ends up being a better build. Of course it's quite wasteful, but that accounts for just living life as well. And I overall believe that we should build sustainable lifestyles while maintaining the ability to do things. Now, it does often cross my mind if what I'm doing for YouTube is really worth it. This video will sit on a server somewhere, and that in and of itself is already quite bad for the environment. It's also why I like to improve the quality of these videos whenever I can, so hopefully it's worthwhile and doesn't just fill up space for no reason. I came back the next morning and took everything off again, but I did mess up one of the sides, so you can listen to my morning voice explaining why we need some new glue clamps. You see this? That's kind of a pity. I wish I had some glue clamps to which they could cross over the entire section. That's what I did with this side. And this one looks a lot better. I mean, when we sand it down it's going to be fine. But yeah, that is the biggest gap I've ever had in one of these builds. In the end I filled up the gaps with some filler and it all turned out fine. Right, I just found this leftover piece from my washing machine which held the barrel in place when it was shipped, and it's going to be like a great marker for marking the inside over here and then drilling the holes, and then we'll do the glue up on the other side so that everything will be aligned to the frame and not the outside, so to say. So by drilling these holes I did get a tear out on the other side, but this will most likely be covered up by the 3D printed inserts later down the line. And after this one I did make sure to place a block of wood underneath to minimize this as much as possible. You can see me use these smaller blocks of wood during the glue up process because I often like to tighten up the build as much as possible. If there's no wood bits between there, it damages the piece. And I'm not really sure what a reasonable amount of clamping pressure is, but I'd always say tighter is better. On the flip side of that, I almost feel like there's no glue left between the joints sometimes, so let me know if this is something I'm doing wrong. I never really bothered to search for it, but this has always been working out pretty good for me. I've never really had a piece break on me before. Alright, got myself the Bosch PDS57AE. You can also buy the A version, and my grandparents dropped this off for me, which I can keep, which is really nice. I don't see them a lot lately because I've been somewhat busy with school and working and this YouTube channel. So I actually brought the piece to my friend's student home as I could sand it down there with the new belt sander. I felt it would create too much noise and dust for my apartment. It was raining quite heavily, so I was quite fortunate that I had this little bike storage hut. This is a very key step I always take in all of my projects, ensuring that everything is nice and level, resulting in a very slick look. If you'd want to make this task a little easier, it's worth considering using a circular saw with quite a large blade to cut everything to size, and this would result in an even straighter finish. With the sander I do sometimes get some dips and overall an uneven finish. In the end though, it survived the journey, which is always a big concern when moving stuff, especially with the softer wood as it can get dinged up quite easily. I always finish the wood with some polyurethane or lacquer. In this case it's lacquer. Just keep in mind that it is quite necessary to wear a mask while doing this and ventilate the space. The last time I did this, I got this distinct sensation of floating above myself, upon which I was ill for 2 days, and that was because I'd been sitting in the same room as the fumes for 20 hours. This is a mask I got from GVS, it's P3 rated, and it's really quite nice, so yeah, I haven't had any out-of-body experiences with this one so far. So this is also just a bit of a reminder for what the design will be. Drew this up in the beginning of the video. You're probably remembering this, but it's been a couple days for me. Now these holes here are going to be filled up with 3D printed parts, like I did on the desk setup, and it will allow us to either create kind of like a basket for the remote and then a charger inside of it, or just to hide the cables that will be inside of this thing. So I marked out where to saw the holes purely based on gut feeling, not necessarily according to the planned design, but in the end it's just important to have the gaps in there, and any minor errors will be fixed up by the 3D printed parts. You'll see me use the right angle on both sides just to double check the marks, as there might be some dips in the wood due to the sanding process. I didn't expect that here, but it is somewhat of a second nature, so measure twice, cut once, and that's only after I've ruined countless projects by not doing so. I'm a little bit afraid that the poles are too close to each other, which will make the board tip. Yeah, it's really back heavy, but you can, should be fine. So personally I like to just drill a hole in the middle and make a form of cross pattern to end each corner with a full stop and then recut from the other side, if you catch my drift. So in the past I'd always try to do it in one go and go all the way around, but it never really works out so nicely. On this build I also somewhat jinxed it because I'm quite afraid that I'm annoying the crap out of my downstairs neighbours. So I was going a little too fast, but again this will all be covered up later on. And that's really quite beautiful about combining woodworking with 3D printing. It's something I plan on doing a lot more. Sadly, my printer did take an early retirement on this project, so we'll have to fix it, and otherwise if we can't fix it, invest in a new one. The jigsaw that I'm using here is the Bosch PEL 900. Now, I'm not a shill for Bosch, but I figured I've always had Bosch tools, so it'd be awesome to have everything in the same colour. But more importantly than that, I have the habit of over-researching the stuff I buy, and that costs me a lot of time, so in relaxing that a little more and just buying everything I need from the Bosch DIY branch, as they seem good enough for my needs. Gave the edges a quick sand down, which means I did have to recoat the top with some lac, but I did that off camera and after that I started modeling the inserts based on the actual gap size. It's easier to model the print to the correct size instead of widening that opening, so it's based on measurements I took after the jigsaw run. Anyway, if you're enjoying the video so far, consider subscribing or liking or leaving a comment. It really helps me out. And I have received some comments from people saying that I'd be able to grow the channel a lot faster if I didn't use the style I use in these videos, which is absolutely correct. People who view this on phones have a worse viewing experience, but I'm making these videos for this channel because I like exploring this medium in more ways than I'm able to in my freelance work. So in the end, it's really just like a creative choice, and I like the way it looks, so I'm sticking to it. Now, I'm also modeling the cover inserts here, which sadly I didn't get around to on this project as I've been extremely busy this week. I've only had a few hours ready to put this project together, so I think I'm considering doing a follow-up video cleaning up some of the design and doing some upgrades, as in the end I wasn't so happy with some other aspects of this build which I'd like to fix sometime. Now, during the print, the bed adhesion also went a little wonky halfway through, which I did try to fix by heating it up with a torch and pressing it down. And to be honest with you, these lights are quite scary. They once melted through my backpack, which is quite dangerous, so I should probably 3D print a little cap that goes over the switch so it doesn't turn on anymore. In the end, we have an inside piece and an outside piece. As you can see here, the corners pop up a little bit due to the mishap at the printer, but it's totally fine, still usable. We'll use 4 of these M3 bolts to hold it all together, and adding an extra nut to the bottom in case the 3D print part isn't strong enough to hold it in place. Now, the bolts are a little too long, but these were the only ones I could find, so probably need to order some new ones pretty soon. I'm wondering if this wood is too soft to deal with this. I probably need to put some metal plates underneath. In this project I'm using some leftover monitor arms, but these are pretty expensive, so going for something like scaffolding tubing would probably be a better solution next time. But as I might have mentioned before, I want this to look very similar in design to the other setups I have, and with these monitor arms it is very conformant to that style. Now, for some reason I wanted to test the cable management halfway through, and it was working out okay. I reckoned I'd leave the chargers easily accessible so that if I'd like to go on a commute and take them with me, it would be quite easy to remove, which wouldn't be the case if I'd route the cables through the column. Alright, so we just got this board of 44 by 94mm of wood, and the plan is we'll cut this into pieces of 30 centimeters, then stack them on top of each other, so to say, and drill a hole with a hole saw, and these will be then like the little baskets for the boards to be held in place, and then a hole in the middle which will be held up with a 3D printed insert with like a clamping mechanism onto the poles. So if I hadn't thought about this idea, I would have probably used some U-hooks instead and somehow found a way to mount that to the monitor arms, but this method is far cheaper, as wooden beams like this only cost around €5. I'm using one of the acoustic panels here to hold up one of the other ends, and using the table's height adjustability to get it up to the correct level, which is incredibly handy. If you have a sit-stand desk lying around, you can definitely turn it into a workbench. It seems far more useful than what they're actually intended for. In retrospect, it might have been better just to cut 2 pieces and test if they would work, but we full sanded it and got ourselves 4 of these. Alright, using the good old drill press. Actually bought this one together with my dad, but I stolen it back. Now, after drilling that first one, I started to consider how I'd remove the excess, as I didn't have any chisels. Luckily, this wood is incredibly soft, so we can just use a standy knife to cut it in half. I'm very surprised that that works. Okay. Re-drilled the hole and doing the same thing over and over again until we have a clean piece. This took quite a while, so we'll skip over quite a lot of it. In the end, we didn't even need to 3D print any brackets because these friction fit over the tubes quite nicely. Even had to unscrew one of the halves to put it on there a little easier. But it's at this point where we somewhat ran into an issue. The board sat at just enough of an angle that it wouldn't stay in place, which is due to the battery compartment sticking out quite a lot on this particular variant. So I have a little bit of a gig coming up and I want to finish this quickly, but still properly. Now I think those didn't work because the holes were so big, so this time I'm just going to try with this one. Seems so we won't be able to use these pieces anyway if it doesn't work, so no harm in trying. I'm fairly sure I've managed to bust this brand new set of hole saws in a single day. It's never really great when stuff starts to smoke, and I've actually seen some people clean up their blades with a special solvent, which would be great. I can't really imagine that these things are truly busted. Alright, left a spot for the fourth. Could put my normal longboard on there, but I'm getting another sponsored board soon, so that'll be nice. I hope it doesn't tip over like these were doing when they didn't have the new mounting plate. It's looking okay. Anyway, for now I'm attaching these rather ugly casters instead of the more aesthetically pleasing black ones that I have under the other setups, as these were still lying around, and until I can find something else for them to do, I'd like to put them to use. It is quite funny, I'm actually primarily using hardware as in screws and bolts and that kind of stuff from products that I've bought in the past, like monster arms and desks and that kind of stuff, which I've never really used because I usually custom mount things, and now I have an entire box full of screws and plasticky bits and a slew of other things which I'm sure one day will come in very handy. Sadly, after screwing on the casters, I did notice a slight defect or a build error, which will be fairly difficult to fix. Yeah, it's twisted. The entire body had twisted to such an extent that one of the wheels was permanently floating. Now, I'm pretty sure we can prop that up with a little plate between the caster and wood, but for now it's fine. It doesn't necessarily need to roll around a whole lot. Okay, so I'd definitely like to come back to the project and fix this twisted nature alongside finish up the design a little bit. So initially I'd 3D printed some caps over here and like a little basket for the chargers or like the remotes to be charged. And that's a nice idea, but I'd also like to add like a little pegboard to the top and hang up the remotes over here so we can also see the charging indicators, and that would be quite nice. Alongside that, I really don't like the look of these wooden beams, so to say. It kind of looks like a pirate ship, and I think we should go back to the design sometime and use some U-hooks instead, in the same black aesthetic as the monostyrene poles. There is some safety concerns regarding this big wooden piece over here. If the batteries have an issue and decide to explode, then this is a nice piece to sustain that fire. I've also seen like some of the filler is like coming out. I think I might have painted it a little too soon, so that will have to be sanded down. Something I also really appreciate about this design is that the boards are facing outwards with the battery compartment, which allows us to plug in the cables a lot more easy and actually see the charging indicators as well, like on the Meeper and on the X-Ray Wave over here. Now, I think for most people it would be far more useful to just like move the poles a bit further back and then put like boards on one side of it so you can keep it in a hallway. But for me, I'd like this to be somewhere, you know, random in the center of the room. It's just nice. Just nice. You know what I mean? Anyway, in the end, we're left with a pretty interesting little charging station. I'm not sure if I'd go for this design again, but it is an interesting concept and I hope it gave you some inspiration. If it did, leave a like, leave a comment, and hopefully see you in the next one.